This episode is sponsored by Dr. Chrono by EverHealth, the #1 mobile all-in-one EHR. Built specifically for medical practices, Dr. Chrono includes an integrated feature that powers a seamless payments acceptance experience. Dr. Chrono Payments offers multiple ways for patients to pay as well as insurance credit card processing. As a Dr. Chrono customer, you can easily activate our fully integrated payment solution that will streamline your cash flow and help you get paid anytime from anywhere. Deliver the best patient experience with a fast and easy way to collect payments. Visit drchrono.com/payments. That's drchrono.com/payments to learn more about Dr. Chrono today. Is there a DPC clinician, tech vendor, or industry champion that goes above and beyond to further elevate the DPC movement? Nominate them for a DPC Innovation Award to recognize them for creating traction, embracing innovation, and demonstrating commitment to the movement. DPC Innovation Award winners will be announced and honored at this year's Hint Summit, taking place in Denver, Colorado, September 27th through 28th. Nominate a DPC innovator at summit.hint.com, plus get $50 off your Hint Summit 2024 registration with promo code MyDPCStory. Direct primary care is an innovative alternative path to insurance-driven healthcare. Typically, patients pay their doctor a low monthly membership and, in return, build a lasting relationship with their doctor and have their doctor available at their fingertips.
DPC to me is a system of healthcare where patients and doctors work in a relationship directly together. And that direct is so unique in this day and age. It's the type of medicine where, us as physicians and me as a pediatrician really went to med school for. And it's the type of medicine that, I aspire to practice on a daily basis. I'm Dr. Nazia Sheriff, and this is my DPC story.
Dr. Nazia Sheriff is originally from the Windy City of Chicago and moved a few years ago with her husband and 2 young children to sunny California. She first discovered her love for pediatrics and working with children when she was in high school. She received her BA in psychology and her medical doctorate from the University of Illinois at Chicago. During her pediatrics training at Loyola Children's Hospital, she was awarded grants for her work in health education for refugee children. Dr. Sheriff then started her career as a pediatric hospitalist at a Chicagoland-based children's hospital, where she took care of newborns and sick children admitted to the hospital. She was the hospitalist medical director as well as the medical student director for many years. Dr. Sheriff created family-centered policies that allowed families to be involved in all aspects of their child's care. Life then brought her to the Bay Area, where she has been focusing on preventative and holistic pediatric care. Dr. Sheriff believes strongly in lifestyle medicine and has a special interest in breastfeeding medicine, nutrition, fitness, socio-emotional health, as well as special needs. She is an IBCLC, is an ACE-certified youth fitness instructor, serves as medical advisor for Cooking with Kids Foundation, and is a certified positive discipline educator. Her passion is to bring pediatric medicine back to its roots and focus again on treating the whole child. In her free time, Dr. Sheriff enjoys family hikes, reading, taekwondo, and international travel. She opened in summer of 2018. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Sheriff.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to open with your why, because I loved that when I went to your website, it's such a calming green. You have olive leaf. You talk about the nurturing of a child and your practice as a whole child. And I wanted to get a little bit deeper into the why. Why did you choose olive leaf as the name of your DPC practice?
Well, I really think that there's so much meaning behind a name. I feel that way I felt that way even when I was naming my own children. And so when, Olive Leaf was being conceptualized, I knew that I had to have a name that had a really personal meaning to me. And, that reflected the values of the practice. So, I knew that we wanted to focus on nutrition, bring in some like a calming, peaceful presence. And I just have always been, I guess, attracted to the symbol of the olive tree. It didn't quite, fit because again, I was dealing with babies and kids. And so, they haven't quite laid their roots and become a big tree yet. So that's where Olive Leaf was born. It's symbolic of my practice philosophy of, like you mentioned, treating the whole child. So treating mind, body, and spirit. The olive leaf has nutritious as well as medicinal properties that obviously signify two of the major approaches that, my practice takes, healing the mind and the body. And then in spirit, it grows into a universal symbol for peace and tranquility. So really, my practice strives to help the little olive leaf eventually flourish into a wholesome tree.
As a parent, that's something that we think about in terms of our kids and who they'll be in the future. And I think that's great that your practice is focusing on nourishing them in all of those departments, so to speak, so that when they grow into full trees, when they go into full grown adults, they have, strong roots in healthy nutrition, healthy habits, healthy coping skills. And then feeding off of that, one of the tabs on your website, it says our philosophy. And I really love that also because, people put it in different words, our mission, our story, our why, about us. Why did you choose our philosophy as the heading on your website?
Well, I knew that when I was starting Olive Leaf Peds that it was, to attract, families that kind of believed in the mission or the philosophy. And the philosophy just really encompasses, essentially an entire way of thinking. And then therefore also, goes into an entire way of living. And so when I came up with, philosophy, I was kind of thinking about what are the core principles that were important in my experiences as a mother, in my experiences as a pediatrician, and where does, that need lie in our greater community? And so that's where, the philosophy of treating the whole child or having a holistic, holistic approach to, just to clarify, came in. And also just, in the beginning, it was really interesting because I wanted to provide a different type of service for my families. And I started out with house calls. So the philosophy included, house calls as well. And, most importantly, long-lasting change in the world of pediatrics comes only when the parents and the families are invested in your plan of care. So I really wanted to highlight that my care was family-centric and not just child-centric, because the child is obviously a larger part of that family unit.
So when you say that, it makes me think about what was mentioned in your bio. When you were in Chicago prior to moving to California, you were heavily involved in hospital medicine. And one of the things that you had been very passionate about was creating policies where families were very heavily involved in their kids' care. And so I'm wondering, while you were in that hospitalist setting, where did you learn about the idea of having a direct pediatric practice? And can you tell us a little bit more about that journey to create your own practice?
Quite honestly, it was an accident, a happy one, but definitely an accident. So I was a pediatric hospitalist for over 7 years while I was in Chicago. That's actually, my native city where I grew up and whatnot. And while I was practicing as a hospitalist, there were so many gaps in care because people just weren't communicating, right? The respiratory therapists were not communicating with the nurses, we're not communicating with the physicians. And so I implemented a policy, and I was the director there. I was in administration. So, I had the ability to go ahead and implement these policies, these family-centered policies, rounds and communication and whatnot. And, over time, I really was starting to get a little bit disillusioned with the big box medical system through, what I experienced as a hospitalist, what I saw with administration. I worked with some amazing human beings, but just the system was so flawed. And I didn't see myself being part of that system in the long run. And so I was getting that, 7-year itch that sometimes we doctors get, right, at that turning point of our career. And I swear the universe just works in the most amazing ways, because right at that time, while I was getting this itch, we kind of made a sudden life decision because of my husband's career path and an amazing opportunity that came his way to move to the Bay Area. This was, so we literally packed up, left family. We had, our kids who were kind of 5 and 7 at the time and really upset with us about the move. And we just were like, hey, let's just do this. Let's move to the Bay Area. And I felt like the universe at that time was, calling to me to just or just creating a new path for me. And when I got here, I was like, okay, I know I don't want to be part of this, of a hospital system, of a big box medical system. So let me go and try out some solo practices. And I did. And I knew, I was like, I want to be in the community. I want to be hands-on with my patients. I have so much to offer. I've learned extensively about nutrition and gut health and behavior and discipline and all that. I want to do all of that in community pediatrics. And the few different practices that, I tried out either part-time or as locums, which, it was kind of a trial period with the intention of me potentially joining. It didn't really have space for that because they were still traditional insurance-based practices. And so what happened was I was spending 30 minutes with these teenagers that are like, Dr. Sheriff, you're the only person I've ever told this to, but I cut myself and I do this. And it was just because I was just spending time with them and I was going way over my limit and falling behind. And the whole system was so frustrating to me. And then I realized that I didn't, make this big life move and this big life decision to, get out of the comfort of academia or a big hospital system just to, fall into another trap. And I started doing some research and I came across DPC. I don't even know how I came across it, quite honestly, but I was like, this is it. I have to do a non-insurance based practice. And I think I joined the DPC forums on Facebook or something. And I was like, this is it. This is how I'm going to be able to practice full scope as a holistic pediatrician.
And once you made that decision to practice holistic care and to open your own insurance-free clinic, did you do any market research?
I had done some market research in, essentially the Bay Area. At the time, there were no DPC practices. Actually, sorry, there was one, and it was about 45 to 50 minutes away for pediatrics. I don't think there were any for adults. There were concierge practices. So there was concierge peds, and then there were few concierge adults, quite a few of those, but not DPC. And I kind of did this hybrid thing for a while because I was like, I'm not sure about DPC either. Is it going to work? Why isn't it here? And so I did this hybrid and I found, faults with that concierge model, even within my own practice. And I eliminated it pretty quickly within months of opening my practice. And I went into straight DPC. So I again, my market research just consisted of within a, 1 hour drive, right, from the location I'm at, just to see what availability there was.
Gotcha. And when you initially opened, how did you announce to the community that you were open for business?
So I did some Facebook posts. I networked like crazy. I got out there to the birth workers, to other concierge physicians, really just anyone that I could speak to about DPC. I think I tried some BNI groups. Those I realized were not for me. They are for some people. They weren't for me. And yeah, just kind of organically got out there. I honestly didn't spend a ton of money on marketing. I just, put myself out there.
And when you opened your practice, did you have a physical clinic or did you do home visit and telemedicine first?
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to start off lean because this is a big risk that I was taking, somewhat risk averse. And so I was like, well, let me just start off, with a, with a $5,000 budget, or maybe not, wasn't even that, and just do house calls and just get all my, equipment and whatnot and start off that way. So I did house calls for about a year and I was growing and I was getting, really tired of driving, quite honestly. I loved seeing babies, especially for the first time or, essentially for like the first month in their home, because I felt like it's important to provide a new family that service. But past that, I didn't really feel like it was necessary. So about a year after I actually opened up my clinic. And it's, 5 minutes away from my home. I chose a path of convenience, quite honestly, when opening up my clinic. But yeah, 5 minutes away from my home, 5 minutes away from my kids' schools. And it's just, I love it. Like it's my, it's my little sanctuary away from home sometimes.
That's awesome. And when you mentioned that fatigue from driving that happened, did you have any strategies or thoughts when you were opening and you knew that you were going to open lean and do home visits as to how you would accept patients? Like, did you have any, I'm only going to take the patients first from this radius and then work outwards from there? Or how did you do it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I believe, part of practicing, preaching holistic care is that you also have to practice it in your own life. Right. So I have a family, and they're obviously a very important part of who I am and my identity as, being a mother. And so I knew that I couldn't stretch myself too thin, and I still had to be available for my own children. So I limited it initially to about 20 minutes. The Bay Area is a little bit nutty because you could be driving like 3 miles and it might take you like an hour. So, I limited initially to about 20-minute, driving radius. And then sometimes I'll still extend that to like 30 minutes, especially for newborns. But that's kind of my max. I don't ever go past 30 minutes. And I, even from the beginning, I really wasn't planning on going any further than that.
And on your website, you list the areas that you service within that 20 minutes, but it also says and more. So it specifically reads Berkeley, Oakland, Piedmont, Lafayette, Orinda, Moraga, Walnut Creek, Alamo, Pleasant Hill, Danville, and more. And so I'm wondering if you make exceptions, what usually falls in that bag of and more.
Yeah, that's, and that I actually initially didn't have that and more. And then I realized that I was getting calls from these really sweet, somewhat, really excited families about my practice. And so, oftentimes right after baby is born, I'll sometimes extend, my services outside of the cities listed and see the babies at home for about a month and then have them come to my clinic. So, again, it's per my discretion, but usually if there's very sweet sounding families that are super interested in my practice and believe in the philosophy, I do tend to be, a little lax about that.
And you can, it's your practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think back on when my former attending, who's a pediatric hospitalist, he had a baby on his service that lived 45 minutes away from me, and the baby needed a circumcision. And so came to my clinic and I was like, oh my gosh, you drove all the way 45 minutes from where you live to come see me. And they were like, yes, because your friend in the hospital recommended that we come see you. And that family, I just think about them when you mentioned, there's those special families who are so excited about, being in partnership with a physician who actually cares for them and who takes the time out to really give them, the time that they need to address concerns, especially with newborns.
Absolutely. It's, I think, one of the beautiful things about having a practice like this. And it, I think families that feel akin to the practice also obviously self-select and you somehow self-select them. And, the universe just kind of makes everything work out.
And thinking back to those earlier days, whether it be the early days when you started, what were some of the growing pains that you remember, either good or bad?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the biggest growing pain was that because I was being a little bit conservative about marketing in the beginning, and I'm not originally from the Bay Area, just getting patients, and setting up, I had all these system processes set up in place, and because I'm, have focused a little bit on detail, in case you couldn't tell from my website, and not, like pounding that pavement and not seeing that return right away. I think that was pretty painful. But, I consulted with other peds DPC doctors across the nation. There's like a small network of us that's growing actually, which is amazing. And everyone had the same story. Even I think family practice and adult DPC docs kind of all said the same thing. So yeah, that was a little tough in the beginning. And I think, my practice still cycles through that, right? The pandemic, I had to switch up things, convert to telehealth when possible, but still keep, some in-person visits. And so that was a different type of growing pain, I think. But the again, going back to it, I think what centers me, and you mentioned this before, is that really like, this is my practice. If something isn't working, if something is, so painful, I can always amend it. So I am constantly changing my goals or, certain ways I do things and whatnot, just to fit.
That's awesome. And as your patients have joined your practice, what's the most common way that they actually find you?
It's actually been referrals through, through my network. A lot of birth workers have referred me. They really like kind of like my, a little bit more of a gentle way of care, especially with babies. And then actually Google search. So I actually have a question on my form, my intake form, as well as on my contact form, just asking like, hey, how'd you hear about us? Just to find out specifically that. So it's either birth workers or Google search Yelp.
And do you have any specific tips on how you manage your Google business profile and your Yelp profiles?
Yeah, I don't have any amazing tips other than, actually, I have one centering tip. As soon as you start getting patients, ask them to write you reviews. I was very bashful in the beginning, and I think I went like a whole year plus or something before I asked any of my patients for it. And they would all say like, oh my goodness, we love your service, blah, blah, blah. It's all so great. It's so different. But I just, as doctors, we're not used to accepting that praise, and we're not used to like showing, that praise to the outside world when we do get it, sharing that praise, I guess I should say. So I think just trying to get reviews right from the beginning, being bold and confident in your services and the value that you provide, that's going to help attract other patients. It's going to help your SEO, rankings as well. Other than that, just, posting on Google whenever you can. I think that also helps things. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Other than that, like my profiles on both aren't anything special. They're just basic stories about me. But, I've tried to recently work a little bit harder on getting reviews.
And can you give us an example of the dialogue you have with patients when you ask for a review these days?
Yeah. So this actually took me a really long time to muster up the courage to ask my patients. But typically, and I don't ask all my patients. I'll just, when I remember, I will. But typically I'll just say, hey, they'll be leaving. They'll say something nice like, oh my goodness, thank you so much. This was such a great visit, and blah, blah, blah. I feel so calm or whatever. And if I see that window of opportunity, I will take it now and say, hey, I'm so glad you feel that way. I love having families like you in my practice. And, I don't hire any like big marketing firms or anything like that. So I would love it if you would share exactly that in either a Google or Yelp review. And I'm happy to send you a link if you'd like to make it easier. And they're always, usually they're like, oh, sure, of course, no problem.
That's great advice. And I feel that because I'm sure everybody has seen a Google or a Yelp review, when you read those positive reviews, it's like all 5 stars because, when people love practices, especially DPC practices, they go berserk, like in a good way. I mean, they're literally the walking and talking billboards of your practice. And so I am really glad that you shared that. I hope that helps others, especially those who might also be in that boat of not really sure about how to ask, or I don't really like asking people for reviews. It goes back to the idea that DPC is building relationship-based medicine. And if you are in a relationship with somebody and giving them the best care, you definitely deserve kudos where kudos is deserved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, just really honing in on those relationships that you've worked so hard to foster. And like you mentioned, letting them do the advertising for you. I feel like it also just draws, families a little bit more organically than a marketing company or a big box firm.
Sure. And I'm sure a lot of the legwork is already done in terms of understanding what your practice brings to your patients, because the potential families or the new families are hearing organically, like, this is what my kid, had at his or her visit with Dr. Sharif.
Yeah. Oh, it's so great because whenever I get, patient inquiry calls from from a family that was referred by one of my patients, it's the easiest call ever because, I'm like, oh, so, have you had a chance to look at my website? Do you want me to go over my philosophy? And they're like, no, we got it. We're friends with so-and-so. And they told me how, how amazing things are. Like, how do I sign up? And it's that easy. So it's just, yeah, it's so seamless.
And have you come to a point where you're putting people on a wait list?
I think I'm getting pretty close. And again, I think my goals have shifted a little bit just with the pandemic and just really, being able to balance things in my life overall. So I've condensed my goals and I'm getting very close to putting people on a wait list, especially after like the last couple of months. That's definitely in the works.
And now, with that said, how do you structure your week in terms of the amount of home visits and the number of clinic visits?
Yeah, great question. So I limit home visits now only to newborn to 3-month olds. So that cuts down immensely. I also make special exceptions for kids that maybe have some special needs or a lot of anxiety. They, I think, also deserve, the doctor coming to them. So I would say probably 30 to maybe 40% of my week is house calls and the rest is clinic. And I try to carve out at least one day a week, whether it's a Monday or a Friday as my admin day, sometimes both if I'm lucky, and do heavy lifting midweek. And again, that's the beauty of DPC is, I'm able to kind of flex in and out. And, when my kids have like busy like Tuesday and I have to be that room mom or whatever, then I'm able to, schedule around that and it works.
That's just great. I just love that. I mean, I think back on one of my friends' kids had a school performance, like a kindergarten school performance at 2:00 in the afternoon. And I'm like, who can go to that? A DPC doctor could go to that for sure.
100%. 100%. Yep. This week I'm on carpool duty. So I am picking up everybody at 2 p.m. My clinic is closed for business at 1:45.
It's awesome. And do you ever have cases where you do have a surge of need in terms of like cold and flu season or the pandemic, where you have to do extra hours of care than you're normally used to? And how do you balance that with your family life?
So, one of the things about being an entrepreneur is sometimes these surges happen, right? And it's not, like a very clean, linear, exponential growth. It's like, ooh, a little. I know you guys can't see me like on this podcast, but I'm basically doing a little wave with my hand. But yeah, it goes up like that. And so I've learned to like embrace the surges to the best of my ability, pull in some extra hours after the kids go to bed with, charting or logistics or whatever needs to get done. That week, I really utilize my admin. I have a fantastic administrative assistant and we've streamlined some processes. So, she does a lot of heavy lifting with me that week. And I try to, put as many responsibilities on her as I can. And then I know that the surge is not going to last forever. So I mentally prepare myself just to kind of get through like that week or month or whatever that looks like. And then, things will kind of always balance out after the surge.
And can you share more about this assistant that you have? Is this a virtual assistant or is this somebody who is physically in your office now?
Yeah, so she's California based, but she is virtual. And I've toyed with the idea of hiring somebody to be in my office, but I really haven't had that need, quite honestly. And she does everything, non-clinical. So all of my, I don't know, like onboarding patients, chart like reviews or, like filing things, faxes, some phone calls, all that stuff. So she takes care of all of those things for me. And even, like training her was a bit of a process. She's been with me for, it'll be a year actually, at the end of the summer. And, the first few months it was a little bit tough, but now she's amazing. And I don't know how I could function without her.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you to Spruce Health for supporting the My DPC Story podcast. The ways we communicate have changed dramatically over the past decades, but technology and tools in healthcare have not kept pace. Patients want more access and digital convenience, as well as the ability to text their care teams. Care teams are inundated with more communication and rising expectations, but are still using tools and technology stuck in prior decades. Spruce Health created a solution for the tech-forward DPC practice by creating a communication product designed to serve both the patient and the doctor through intuitive HIPAA-compliant workflows, tagging, scheduled messages, and triage templates ready for use, whether you're on your phone or in the exam room. New users get 20% off for the first 12 months of a paid plan with code MARYAL20. That's MARYAL20. So check out Spruce Health today at sprucehealth.com or check out the link in the show notes. Absolutely. And in terms of getting to a place where you and your assistant are able to work seamlessly, what are some of the key things that you found helpful and necessary in that process to get to where you are today?
Yeah. So here's the game changer. I actually had her make her own SOP manual. And we worked on it together, but she was pretty much responsible for it. And after that, I edited, all her responsibilities were just all laid out, listed out, my expectations, of how I wanted things done. And really after that, things took a turn for the better. So I highly recommend that everybody do that. And again, for me at that moment in time, I didn't have time to make it for her. So it was one of her responsibilities to make it for herself with me overlooking it.
That's genius. And just in terms of, especially if there are early entrepreneurs, SOP is standard operating procedure. But yes, I think that it's also so important, I'm sure, for you, because as an entrepreneur, it helps you with your time and not flailing all over the place because you're working in that SOP that she's set up, that you've embraced.
Yeah, absolutely. And even that, even our SOPs, right, change all the time. It's a fluid process. So it's great to have the ability to modify that as my practice changes. So for example, my onboarding process has, had to be tweaked. It was filled with inefficiencies. And so we revised that just to, come up with a better system of how we could get through patients, get them all set up and, all tuned out together. So yeah, it's really great to have stuff in writing, and I'm big into lists and, checking things off, and so is she. So it works really well.
You don't necessarily have to geek out over this, but if you are geeking out over this and questioning if you could do DPC, I'm going to say absolutely yes, because this idea of constantly being able to change based on your needs. I mean, yes, we do it in everyday life, but I feel that when it's extended to the practice of medicine, I just find that so exciting, because just like you're talking about, you can have hours that you set. You literally can change your SOP. The next sentence I type is my new SOP, and I'm making it because I'm typing it, not because I had administrators telling me that this is how it's going to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually applies to all aspects of your practice when you're in the setting, because whenever I start to feel that my practice is becoming stagnant or, there's lack of growth, I find that it's because I have to tweak something. And maybe a little tweak will either make me enjoy the practice a little bit more, or, start having it grow in a more natural direction. So that's the other, beauty of DPC. That being said, I'm always, people call me for advice and whatnot about specifically for pediatric DPCs. I do also want to paint a very realistic picture because I am also like a realist at the end of the day. Like it is a lot of hard work. Most of it is very enjoyable, some of it not, but yeah, it is a lot of hard work. And for some, growth might be slow. Especially my first year, I definitely had slow growth. And with clinic, again, that was another game changer. As soon as I set up a clinic, I started getting patients driving from like an hour away, to come to my services. And I was able to now expand my patient base because of that.
Now, in terms of your assistant, I want to take a step back even to how you found your assistant. How did you end up getting in touch with somebody who could be an assistant in a medical clinic?
Yeah. So I actually went through a couple other virtual assistants through a company, and they just did not, work out. We were not on the same page. And then I have a buddy who's a lactation consultant. I, work very closely with her, and she said her admin was looking for more hours. So it just, and I interviewed her. It seemed like a great fit. She was already like, HIPAA compliant. She was already familiar with, moms and babies. She'd never done pediatrics, but she did have like a little bit of, background in medicine. And yeah, we talked, and it was a really informal interview because for me, it's also about just like, I can probably tell within like the first 10 minutes of a phone conversation whether it's going to be right fit. And yeah, it worked out.
That's great. And, it goes back to when you were marketing and you were just telling everyone you could about your practice and how it organically grew from there. I love that that's how you've ended up finding your assistant. And it makes me think about Dr. Natalie Gentili, who had been working with a medical student and, basically exposing her to DPC. But similarly, if you had somebody who wasn't even necessarily an assistant, but was a really good organizer, or somebody who was willing to learn the art of being an assistant. I mean, as you talk with people, you literally could find somebody that you could train and groom from the get-go. I think that you don't necessarily have to have that coding background to be any coding background to be an assistant that's effective in doing administrative tasks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, I was fortunate where she did have a little bit of a medical background, but she didn't really know anything about pediatrics. And so that was a little bit of a training process. But yeah, really anyone who has great organizational skills, who has, who is just like a quick thinker and a quick learner, they could easily do a, virtual admin assistant job. Absolutely.
That's great. I wanted to go into more detail on your onboarding because you talked about that your assistant is doing the heavy lifting when it comes to onboarding, but what does it look like from the patient side?
Yeah, so the patient experience is very important, and the patient experience is only through me. So my admin does all the stuff in the background, but for me, starting my pediatric DPC practice, I really wanted all the clinical stuff and the patient experience to be directly with the doctor because that's what people are signing up for. So all the, initial welcome emails come through me. I do customize them. I have a general template and I customize them to each patient, depending on what their scenario is, if they're about to have a baby, if they already have a baby, if, they have a 10-year-old. And yeah, I mean, it's really, really pretty easy. We do have, everything is online. I'm a big proponent of paperless. For those practices that haven't gone paperless, please do. It will make your life so much easier and it's so much friendlier for the environment. And so they just fill out an online registration form. All of my policies and procedures are on there, but I also just talk them through it as well prior to signing on, just to make sure they clearly understand everything. And once they sign on, they get a welcome email. We, ask them if they have any questions, and then we just schedule our first visit. The back end of things is like, a little bit more logistically based in terms of getting records, reviewing records, blah, 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 all that stuff, scheduling. And that's all what my admin does. But as soon as they sign up, as soon as they fill out the form, I tell them that they're welcome to text me any questions. So sometimes I'll have, expecting moms say, hey, can we schedule a quick chat before I go into labor? And I love that because then I can start, I can start guiding them right from the beginning before baby's even born. So that's been fantastic.
How do you work that in terms of contractually when a baby is yet to come out? Do you sign the parents on as patients, or how does that work for you?
Yeah. So the baby is signed on, as expectant as like in utero, they initially have like an enrollment fee that they pay for me. And then from that, there's like a contract that's made between myself and the guardians, right, of the baby. I don't give any like specific, like, I mean, I do give some advice, but I don't call it medical advice. I call it more of like, like coaching, and with the caveat that all the advice I'm giving them is for the health of the baby, who is ultimately going to be my patient. So it's never surrounding mom's health. It's always associated with, upcoming baby. And, from my standpoint, my malpractice standpoint, that's like totally fine.
I think that's great because it doesn't limit the care to only moms who are scrambling to find somebody after they're discharged from the hospital. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Have you tried an AI scribe in your clinic? Well, I've tried so many, and I can say Heidi Health is the best AI scribe I have come across thus far. With Heidi Health, I can create unlimited customizable templates for my notes to help me truly cut down on the time I'm spending charting. Template for pediatric well child check? Done. Template for weight loss management? Done. Some of my favorite things I've built into my AI template, beyond the general soap note, are having a list of actionables for our team to take after a patient visit, having the diagnoses listed, and creating an after-visit summary for our patients. Not only have I found Heidi Health to be the most helpful, customizable AI scribe so far, it's also more affordable than most out there. So try Heidi Health today and see how you can harness the power of an AI scribe for your practice. To get an entire month of Heidi Pro free, go to the homepage of mydpcstory.com and click on the Heidi Health ad.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think the bulk of my patients actually do sign on during their prenatal period. And I encourage that just because, like I said, we can, start talking about breastfeeding right away. And we can, sometimes being in the Bay Area, they have questions about vitamin K or the Hep B vaccine or what the hospital experience is going to look like during COVID. And so I'm happy to guide them a little bit right from the start.
And now I want to touch on your IBCLC training because you're, as of this recording, you're still working towards getting your certification. Is that correct?
So I just took my exam last Tuesday, and it's been, I don't know, like a decade since I've taken a standardized exam. So that was quite fun. And yeah, it's just a matter of, I'm getting results and hopefully I passed and then I'll be credentialed as an IBCLC. That being said, it really is just something on paper because my experiences up until this point have not changed from like before to after Tuesday. I've been practicing breastfeeding medicine for well over a year now. I have that friend who's a good friend who's an IBCLC, and I actually did a bunch of shadowing with her just to get more comfortable and hone in a little bit more on my breastfeeding counseling abilities. And so I've been doing that, that plus all the reading and training that I did for the IBCLC test really, I think, has prepared me to practice.
And that's one of the questions I wanted to ask in terms of, you mentioned shadowing, because I know that there's a certain amount of hours that you have to get to go along with the test for certification or credentialing. And how did you build those hours in addition to shadowing into your practice?
Yeah. So there's like a window of like, that I think it's like 3 to 5 years or so. I grandfathered in some hours that I had as a hospitalist because we did newborn nursery and, a ton of breastfeeding counseling, although it was really rushed, but still we did it. And then just working as a general pediatrician. So there's a few different pathways you can take. You can either do the mentorship pathway. So if I were to do that specifically with this IBCLC, I think that would be maybe 100 hours or something with her. Or you can do, as physicians, we can actually just do pathway 1, which is a primary pathway, which is the one I ultimately ended up doing. That being said, I want to be the best, right? I want to be a pediatrician who has that, knowledge, but I also wanted to get that experience from a true IBCLC standpoint. And so I felt like that shadowing and the mentorship I received from my colleague was super duper helpful.
And what are some best resources for people to know about? Because I know that like IABLE's out there and
iAble has been fantastic. Oh my goodness, it's been fantastic. So if you want to get your hours, you can use eHealth Learning, and that gives you like your book hours. I think you can get like up to 100 or something like that. And there's also something called LER, Lactation Education Resource. I think that's what it stands for, but most people use eHealth Learning. And iAble, I attended their conference last September, and that after like shadowing the lactation consultant, and actually I have a couple other friends too who are lactation consultants who I sometimes refer to, or we just kind of chat. After like kind of hanging out with them, shadowing them, and then going to the iAble conference, I was finally like, this is breastfeeding medicine. These are my people. This is how I want to practice. So I highly recommend the conference to anyone who's interested.
That's great. And I don't know how they will shift into the future, but so far they've done little mini conferences like every other month or so. And the topics are definitely, they're not static. They're constantly changing, and they're constantly updating the medicine behind the presentations. And I love that they make it clear, like this is physician focused learning and this is patient focused learning, but I'll make sure to include the iAble link on your accompanying blog post on the website. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I really love though that you are, as you mentioned, that you're talking about breastfeeding even before the baby has come out, because it's for the baby's health. And I just think that when I think back on my experience as a first time mom, how many patients had I counseled on the wards, on the postpartum wards about breastfeeding? How many, articles had I read? How many presentations had I been to? But when I actually had a kid, I distinctly remember our attending who had trained us and who had also delivered both of my sons now. She walked in and I was feeding my son and she was like, what are you doing? And so, I really think that that's wonderful that you're bringing breastfeeding medicine, not only as a mother, but also as somebody who clearly supports not only breastfeeding moms, but also kids who are taking formula or both. And I wanted to highlight that because you have this amazing picture that I'm going to put on your blog as well, where for the listeners, if you haven't visited her blog yet, it's 2 slides that can join at the bottom, and one slide is labeled formula, the other slide is labeled breast milk, and there's 2 kids sliding down the slide, and at the confluence it says that they both end up at the point of eating crusty French fries off the floor of the minivan. And so I love that, but it's you're going back with that picture in my opinion to that idea of your philosophy that you're treating the whole child, whether they, had one or the other. But I also think that just your experience and the fact that you're focusing on breastfeeding medicine is also great for those moms who are able to breastfeed or who have questions about breastfeeding, because that's where I feel that even as good as the lactation consultants are in the hospital, their time is so truncated as I feel fee-for-service visits are in primary care, because you're exhausted. You don't know the last time you slept. You don't know your own name sometimes in the hospital if you choose to deliver in the hospital. And then someone tells you this is how you breastfeed in 20 minutes. And what tools do you have after? I mean, literally that was my experience when I had my attending walk in and question, like, what was I doing with my son?
So, the breastfeeding medicine aspect of my practice, comes with just a deep sense of empathy for my patients. And that's really why I wanted to expand on it. Really, my entire practice is in a way like my own wish list of everything that I wanted, from my pediatricians while my kids were young. And my pediatricians were wonderful human beings, but again, with that 10, 12-minute appointment, not really being familiar with breastfeeding, I really felt like I needed more support. And I realized, I had to do so much learning and research and all that stuff on my own, or seek out resources on my own. And I thought, like, how is a layperson, if I'm a pediatrician and I can't get this straight, how is a layperson able to handle this all on their own? So the goal for my practice was really to be part of that village, specifically for like new moms and young families, and really support them through this tough time. And my breastfeeding journey with both of my children was not easy. And I kind of scrambled, and I, had to figure it out. And I didn't have the greatest support. I really didn't even know there was that much support available. And it was a bit messy. And so I know I want to prevent that for other women if they so choose to breastfeed. I want to try to ease their frustration and just be there for them.
I want to go into more detail on the fact that you're a certified positive discipline educator. And the other part of your bio that I absolutely loved was that you are conscious about socio-emotional health. And so I wondered if you could share about how your practice encompasses those two aspects of your training.
Absolutely. So, I loved in my younger years to geek out on psychology. In fact, that was my undergrad major. And I just had a profound interest even starting from high school. I all AP psychologied up, and I wasn't sure if I was going to go into pediatrics or child psychology because they were both so fascinating to me. In the end, medicine won just because, I'm also a science nerd as well. So I incorporate, a lot of maybe my, I don't have post bachelor's psychology training, but whatever knowledge I do have, I do incorporate that into my practice. I'm very clear with patients, and telling them I'm not a therapist, nor do I replace a therapist, but I can absolutely, coach you during this, time, again, being, having struggles as a parent myself, I was like, how can I solve this? And so I just started reading a ton of, parenting books, and I came across an opportunity to get certified with positive discipline. It's, again, it's a type of, parenting approach that is based on Jane Nelson's work. And I realized that not only could that benefit me as a parent, but, later on with my pediatric patients as well, if I were to practice community pediatrics. And so that's really how that came about. So much of what I do comes from just, again, my experiences, not only as a parent, but just my special interests of my past in discipline and psychology and whatnot. And just, hearing my patients' stories and adjusting plans as needed. What works for one obviously isn't going to work for the other, but just kind of there's over time you start seeing patterns emerge, right? Especially during different developmental stages, and with certain family dynamics, you start seeing these patterns emerge, and you're able to counsel your families a little bit more effectively based on that.
And I'm sure just going beyond the time that you have, the fact that you have relationships with these families and you've seen that family dynamic develop over time and how, that changes, you've seen, and you've been able to see those changes for each family as the kids grow older.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That plus my patients have access to me, right? So it's not limited just to our appointment, which is, typically an hour long, sometimes a little bit more. But it's not just limited to that. My patients are able to email me, text me, call me if it's anything urgent. And, just again, all of that those access points foster the relationship as well, and me getting to know the families equally well.
Do you have your teen patients texting you if they need medical advice?
Yeah, so I don't have a ton of teen patients, and the few I do, I have not written a waiver or anything like that for parents. So they are not allowed to text me, but the parents always are. But I do, tell them that they can schedule an appointment at any time, and we don't have to have, parents in the room if they don't want. So yeah.
And in your practice, to what extent do you discuss contraception?
Quite honestly, my older patients where I would even discuss that with are male. And so I don't prescribe OCPs to them, but obviously we have a discussion on, safe practices and whatnot. And then the other ones are not quite there yet.
Gotcha. And what about vaccinations? How does your practice handle vaccinations, especially childhood preventative vaccines?
Yeah, so we try to follow the CDC schedule. That's the one I recommend. Being a pediatrician, that's always Best practices, obviously are always number one. That being said, I do have quite a few patients that prefer to be on a slower schedule or an alternate schedule. And one of the, mantras of my practice is to provide that, like, I guess, gentler, personalized care, because I think that approach, quite honestly, works best for some of my vaccine hesitant families. They really appreciate that I hear them out and that I'm not dismissive. In the end, some of them actually just end up doing the CDC schedule, or they, vaccinate a little bit more quickly than they would have thought otherwise, just because they do feel like, they can trust my expertise and my judgment.
And going back into your teen care, because I think about how in fee for service, sometimes frustratingly, my teen visits are the fastest visits because I have a person across from me who I haven't seen in 2-3 years, who comes in because they need a sports physical, and they just do not wish to partake in conversation. And so I wonder, because I know your kids are not teens yet, correct?
Mine are not my own kids. I have a tween. I have a 12-year-old. Yes, so almost there.
Gotcha. With you having this relationship with the teens, and I know you said you don't have a lot, but how do you handle their care when they're not necessarily seeing you that often? Do you reach out to them to make sure that they know that they have an open platform? I know you said the parents are the ones who contact you legally, but how do you deal with your teen population with regards to that relationship that you have, that open relationship that you have?
Yeah. So I think, part of it goes again back to, even though they're only seeing me maybe once or twice a year for the super healthy ones, right? I think the fact that we spend like an hour plus at these appointments and they're with me the whole time. There's not an MA taking their vitals or like a nurse giving them their shots. It's me like doing everything. And as I'm doing their vitals, we're chatting and we're having banter and whatnot. And they know that parents have to step up for a little bit. And I just try to become very, very approachable. And again, I have to tailor my communication style, sometimes between genders, if they have a gender preference, or, obviously between ages and whatnot. But yeah, just the fact that I think I really listen to them during these appointments, especially, even when parents are there. I make it a point to really make eye contact with the patient. And I don't have them sitting up on, my treatment bed or whatnot. Everyone's just actually sitting on a couch. So my clinic is also set up in such a way where it's, it's kind of like a living room. And then there's like a treatment bed and some like medical supplies thrown in on the side. So I think that environment also just like facilitates comfort. I was very deliberate in the colors and, the environment that I chose as well. And they know that they can get in touch with me if they need me to. The other thing that I do is if there's things that need follow-up, I don't wait the full 6 months or a year. I'll just schedule, like some of my teen patients, I see them every 3 months because maybe there's something that we're working through. And, each appointment doesn't have to, be a gazillion hours long, but they know that there's that follow-up scheduled. And I like having that frequent contact if there's something that needs to get accomplished.
Great. And in terms of doing things like keeping in touch with your patients, what are the communication tools that you use in your practice to do HIPAA compliant texting or to do even the electronic medical record keeping?
Yeah, so I have a patient portal through my EMR that I use. And I also give, because, my practice is meant to work for families. So some of my patients prefer to use that, but then other patients actually prefer texting and emailing. And I'm very, very clear in, all my contracts and policies, procedure forms, I have them sign in the beginning. And I mention it, at our first visit as well, that if they choose to communicate me via text or email, it is not HIPAA compliant. I mean, it is sort of HIPAA compliant, but it's not 100%. The best way to approach that is through my patient portal. So they signed a waiver that if they do, initiate a text or an email, that they're acknowledging that, we've in big box medicine, we have to have like all these like set barriers, right? Because we're so concerned about potentially, we're practicing defensive medicine more often than not, even if it's subconsciously. The beautiful thing about having a small practice, a boutique or DPC practice, is that, there's that innate trust that happens between families and doctors. And so I don't let the litigious aspect of medicine really guide my care. Again, it's always a pain point for me whenever I have to log on to like my 100 portals just to get access to like the nurse who maybe will talk to the doctor. And I wanted to eliminate that. But I also wanted my patients to acknowledge that that's not completely HIPAA compliant. And so if they're okay with it, then they need to, sign the waiver, and most happily do it. They actually are, completely fine with it.
And thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask more about the tools of your practice, because you do home visits. Can you give the listeners a little peek into your best tools that you carry for your home visits?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So this was such a work in progress, and I've gone through so many doctor bags, from like roller duffels to like, I don't even know, like totes and whatnot, but I have a great system now. And I think after COVID, I finally like perfected it. But yeah, so I have a backpack because it allows me to be hands-free, that I carry the bulk of my tools in. And so that has, my essentials. So it has my stethoscope, my otoscope, ophthalmoscope, has, my like a measuring tape, right, for head circumference, or anything else I might need to measure. It's got a thermometer and pulse ox, right? So I see babies. And so it's important to have a pulse ox ready. And yeah, I think that's kind of the basics of it. I might have a bunch of other stuff in there that, can't recall off the top of my head. And then I have a baby scale as well as a baby measure mat that I actually then just carry. And then I have a vaccine cooler, which I actually, I got off of eBay, and it was like designed for like, WHO transport of vaccines and like, rural places, and keeps vaccines good for like about 12 hours or so. So those are all my tools, but the hands-free is key. I used to have a duffel, and it didn't work as well as I thought. But yeah, that's essentially it. I think those are probably the most important ones.
Fantastic. And I wanted to ask you some of your best recommendations for specific tools that you use in your practice, because everybody has their favorites, but I wanted to ask you yours. What is your best tool for ear cleaning?
Oh, quite honestly, Debrox and a curette. I'm that simple gal. So I don't go beyond that. And the other nice thing about having this practice is that if the child, so I try not to make the experience miserable for the child, because I know that I can always see them in a day or two. And parents don't want to make my visit a miserable experience for their child. So if their ear is so impacted and it's not anything urgent, right, that I need to look at right away, I have the luxury of just debroxing a little bit, or telling, parents to debrox on their own, or, just maybe throw some water while they're in the shower or the bathtub or whatever, right, at home, and bring them back in a couple days, and we'll take a look at that ear. Again, that's if like the curette and all that don't work.
What about best tool for foreign body up the nose?
Oh, so in a flailing child, tweezers, even if they're plastic, won't work. Mother's kiss is usually great. So that's, I think, and that they don't even need to see me, quite honestly. I've had patients just do that like on telehealth. Like they're like, oh, he stuck something up the nose, and you kind of, walk them through it. But yeah, I think that's probably it. I haven't really, other than plastic tweezers, which again are not my favorite, that's probably it.
Best tool as a pain distractor?
Oh, so if we're talking specifically vaccines, I have a couple of different options, and I kind of let families try it out. I have the little Buzzy, which is like basically this little like ladybug or bumblebee, depending on what you get, that you put on the skin, and it kind of like buzzes and stimulates like the nerve endings that are proximal to the area of the vaccine, and supposedly they feel less pain. What I've noticed is in babies and toddlers, like they hate it. They're like, what is this like vibrating thing that you're putting on my skin? So it's fine for older kids, but just a simple yellow shot blocker is great for vaccines. Otherwise, I have this little handheld bubble maker that I think I got from like Target. And I have one in my car for home visits, and I have one in my clinic. And I usually have one parent, like, use the bubble maker while, the little toddler watches the bubbles as I administer vaccines. And then if it's someone who has a lot of anxiety, quite honestly, I tell parents that this is like the one time where I am completely okay with screens. Like child life will use screens for lab draws and things like that, and it's okay. Like bust out that iPhone and put on like your favorite, I don't know, Daniel Tiger episode or something.
Yeah, I definitely employed screens when I had to do sutures in a kid. That was very tough until I think it was Dora the Explorer that we had on our screen. But yeah, I hear you. When anything to get the job done is what the job calls for, screens can definitely help. What about best Band-Aid?
Oh, I quite honestly, I don't even know what the brand of the Band-Aid is, because I alternate between Band-Aid and whatever McKesson has. But you know what? I get like latex free and all such Band-Aids. But for me, what's more important is the visual aspect of it. So right now I have these like cute little tie-dye Band-Aids that all my patients are super excited about. And I have no idea what brand it is. I think I got it off like Anda or McKesson or Amazon or something.
And if you haven't mentioned it already, what is the tool that you could not live without in your practice?
For my line of work, probably my baby scale. Like that thing gets lugged everywhere. I actually have loaners for families too, some that I like give out. I would say my baby scale, but if I guess I'm talking about level of importance, my stethoscope.
That's awesome. And what brand of baby scale do you use, or do you use just a folding one, or what type of?
Yeah. So the one I do for house calls is a very inexpensive one, because I have like 3 or 4 of them that I loan out to families, especially in the beginning. And it's just like a Salter brand that you can get off of Amazon. I've cross-checked it with my more expensive clinic one, and it's pretty accurate. And so yeah, I sometimes families, if they ask me for a recommendation, I just tell them to get that before baby's born.
Wonderful. And something that I loved learning about you was that you had been a host of a clubhouse room recently, and I wanted to ask you, would you recommend physicians harness the power of Clubhouse, and what was your experience using it in general?
Yeah, so I actually really enjoyed using Clubhouse, and I think if I had more time, I would be on it a bit more. But with the whole world being on Zoom and us just having complete Zoom fatigue, I thought that Clubhouse was just really refreshing and filled a need for people, similar to this podcast, just to have these these conversations, right? And these like informal chats. It wasn't visual at all. So definitely more for, the auditory person. But yeah, I felt like it was just very calm and relaxed. And there was, not a ton of formality, which I really enjoyed.
And did you find that there was a learning curve to be a co-host of a room?
It initially, yes. I think the hardest part was just to figure out how to like accept the invitation and sign up, quite honestly. And then after that, it was totally fine. But yeah, not more so than I guess Facebook or Instagram or whatnot.
And as direct pediatric care is growing as well in your area, if others wish to reach out to you after this podcast, what's the best way for others to connect?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So they can text me on my business line, 925-297-5573, or they can email me, and that's dr@oliveleafpeds.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Sheriff, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fantastic.
Next week, look forward to hearing from Dr. Nithya Natarajan of Blossoming Mamas in West Columbia, South Carolina. Our first season will be wrapping up in the next few weeks, and we are already prepping for season 2. If you are a physician in the DPC ecosystem who would like to be featured, please visit the Contact Us section of mydpcstory.com. And coming out soon will be the My DPC Story Listener Survey. This survey is geared towards finding out what you, the listeners, love about the podcast and about how we can grow and continue spreading the word about direct primary care. Stay tuned. If you like what you heard today, please leave a review and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Tell your friends too. For more information on this episode and much more, including DPC swag, please visit mydpcstory.com. Also, for the latest in DPC news, check out dpcnews.com. Until next week, this is Marielle Concepcion.